This morning I'll be reading for the scripture reading Luke 7, verses 1 through 5. When Jesus had finished saying all this in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum. There a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." That's chapter 7, verses 1 through 5 of Luke.
So Jesus was born in Bethlehem, and a little bit later, when he and his family were in danger, they briefly lived in Egypt. That kind of set the stage for him to parallel the Israelites escaping Egypt. But it said, "Out of Egypt I have called my son." So he lived in Egypt for a little while, and then he grew up in Nazareth. Even though Nazareth was his hometown, he didn't live there later. In fact, his own hometown, tried to kill him when he first started teaching and presenting the plan of the arrival of the kingdom. They tried to end his life. When Jesus taught and did his miracles during his ministry, he lived in Capernaum, and that's on the north shore of Galilee. If you were to try to hunt him down, that would be one of your best bets too, is to look in that area. And it just makes sense because that's where Peter and James and John and Andrew and Matthew, they all were from that area. They all lived in Capernaum. Jesus taught all around that area, but he lived in Capernaum. I didn't know this until recently. It means village of Nahum. So it's possible that's where that prophet came from, the prophet Nahum that we read about. But Capernaum was a perfect location for Jesus to begin presenting his message because it had spiritual significance. If you want to glance at Matthew 4:15, what's going on here is Matthew's quoting Isaiah 9 when Assyria came and took everybody into captivity. One of the key, military strategic approaches was Zebulun and Naphtali. In Matthew 5:14, quoting this prophecy in Isaiah 9, it says, "The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles, the people who were sitting in a darkness saw a great light, and those who were sitting in the land in shadow of death, upon them a light dawned." It wasn't that long ago I was kind of wondering, why is it mentioning Zebulun and Naphtali? And it's because hundreds of years before, when the Assyrians came and just took out the Israelites and hauled them off into captivity, that's where they hit first. And so when Jesus started teaching about this release from spiritual captivity, he started in the same spot. It was kind of a poetic way of indicating where darkness had fallen, Jesus would now arrive and undo that darkness on a spiritual level. And Capernaum is on the border of Zebulun and Naphtali. And interestingly enough, Matthew 9:1 even calls Capernaum Jesus' own city. So I don't know if you were to bump into him and say, "Well, where are you staying? Where do you hail from?" We might say, "So, I'm from Capernaum. That's where I live now." And that seems pretty significant. Jesus presented this lesson on a mountain. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. And right after he presented that lesson, he healed a leper. We talked about that. And then he heads for home to Capernaum. And if you go to Matthew 8:5, here's what happens. He's on his way back home. And he gets home. He enters the city of Capernaum. And something else happens. So this is after he's healed the leper. This is after the Sermon on the Mount, after the leper. And then in Matthew 8:5 it says, "And when Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him, imploring him and saying, 'Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, fearfully tormented.' Jesus said to him, 'I will come and heal him.' But the centurion said, 'Lord, I'm not worthy for you to come under my roof, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go, and he goes. And to another, come, and he comes. And to my slave, do this, and he does it.' Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who were following, 'Truly I say to you, I have not found such great faith with anyone in Israel.' I say to you that many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, but the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, it shall be done for you as you've believed." And the servant was healed that very moment. We get some additional details from Luke, so I'm going to go ahead and read this. This is Luke chapter 7, starting with verse 1. So Luke has an account as well of this, and he has a little bit more detail that will help us. Luke 7:1 says, "When he had completed all his discourse in the hearing of the people, he went to Capernaum, and a centurion's slave who was highly regarded by him was sick and about to die. When he heard about Jesus, he sent some Jewish elders asking him to come and save the life of his slave. When they came to Jesus, they earnestly implored him, saying, 'He is worthy for you to grant this to him, for he loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue.' Now Jesus started on his way with them, and when he was not far from the house, the centurion sent friends, saying to him, 'Lord, do not trouble yourself further, for I am not worthy for you to come under my roof. For this reason I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you, but just say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I also am a man placed under authority with soldiers under me, and I say to this one, go, and he goes. To another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and he does it.' Now when Jesus heard this, he marveled at him and turned and said to the crowd that was following him, 'I say to you, not even in Israel have I found such great faith.' When those who had been sent returned to the house, they found the slave in good health." Now, I'm going to go and mention this might look like it has some contradictions, and we're going to take a closer look. And obviously, in every single case, when you're dealing with the Bible, there are no contradictions, just more details. Jump over to Matthew 4:23. Matthew 4:23. Jesus was going throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness among the people. The news about him spread throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all who were ill, those suffering with various diseases and pains, demoniacs, epileptics, paralytics, and he healed them. Everyone in the area had heard about this man, Jesus. If there had been such things as news back then, he would have been on the news. He was saying incredible things. He was doing incredible things. And this delegation approached Jesus, sent by a Roman centurion, a Gentile, not a Jew, not with the people of Israel. He had also heard about Jesus. We don't know exactly how he heard about him, but obviously the news has spread. We're given enough details to maybe get an idea of what was going on in this centurion's mind. He might have been thinking, obviously he's thinking, I don't deserve to go to Jesus, but I know some people in the community. I built their synagogue. He's on good terms with these people. So I'll send a delegation, some representatives for me, someone to go to Jesus on his behalf. And so Matthew 18, it says the centurion came to Jesus. What that means is that delegation was sent, he sent the elders of the Jews on his behalf. They thought he deserved help because he built them a synagogue. And it's kind of worth considering. Jesus preached all through Galilee in the synagogues. He might have preached in the very synagogue this centurion built. Now, you probably know a centurion was in control of about 100 soldiers. I guess it wasn't always exactly 100. You had some spares, and sometimes you lost a few. So it was always approximately 100, just maybe give or take. And then those groups of about 100 were placed in regiments of about 600 to 1,000 soldiers, very disciplined. If you know anything about the Roman military system, you know they were very, very disciplined. Centurions were usually very important. A lot of the upper level officers, like generals and things like that, they were handpicked by maybe the emperor or friends and things like that. It was more about friendships. But the centurions were different. They were picked by their soldiers. You can imagine 100 guys would get together and they would pick the best man out of them to lead them because he would be making decisions in battle, life and death decisions. So they wanted somebody who was brave, somebody who had demonstrated courage on the battlefield, somebody disciplined, intelligent, had good judgment. In the Roman Empire, centurions were some of the most admirable guys. because the position was based on qualities that spoke well of any man. And I had never noticed this before. I heard a guy talking about this, and he pointed out how centurions actually stand out in Scripture as admirable men, and you start noticing this once it's pointed out. Like when Jesus died on the cross, there was only two guys that openly acknowledged that Jesus was the Son of God. One of them was a thief. One of them was a centurion. In Matthew 15:39, we read about him. Remember when Paul was in that shipwreck, and they were going to hit the shore, and the soldiers didn't want to lose the slaves, the prisoners, and so the plan was to kill all of them just in case they were able to reach the shore and escape. And it was a centurion named Julius who stopped that plan. He shut it down, and it mentions that he treated Paul very well. And you probably remember in Acts 10, the first Gentile convert was Cornelius, a centurion. The centurion we're talking about is the one who sent this delegation to Jesus, and he was even different than all other centurions because he treated the Jews pretty well. The way the Jews described him in Luke 7:5, you probably remember, he says, they say, he deserves your attention, Jesus. Says he loves our nation, and it was he who built us our synagogue. Most centurions had one God, and it was Caesar. For whatever reason, something was going on here where this centurion was on good terms, maybe admired the Jews and had built them a synagogue he wasn't even allowed to go into. And also, it's something admirable about him is he cared about his servant. He obviously cared about this guy. In Luke 7:2, it says his servant was highly regarded by him, was sick and about to die. Very unusual. Remember I mentioned, a centurion could be in charge of some men. People died all the time. Very unusual for a Roman centurion to treat a slave that well. If a servant was sick, he'd just kick him out, get another one. It's also worth noticing when Jesus taught to turn the other cheek, and this was not long before this, he was probably not talking figuratively. He was talking to a group of people whose country was under military occupation. It would be easy for them to fill in the blank. When a Roman hits you, offer the other side of your face. When you thought of a Roman soldier, violence came to mind. Some soldiers, if you remember in Luke 3 and verse 14, John is talking, remember John the Baptist, he's talking, and some soldiers say, well, what should we do? And notice what he tells them in Luke 3:14. And soldiers also asked him, this is talking about John, saying, and we, what must we do? And he said to them, extort from no man by violence. He said, don't be violent. Because they had a reputation for being violent. They had a tendency to be rough with people. If you doubt that, just read about the account of Jesus in custody with these kind of people. The soldiers were more than rough with him. The Roman soldiers were also implied at another point in Jesus' lesson in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:41, whosoever shall compel you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. You probably know that under that jurisdiction, a Roman soldier, if he was carrying baggage, maybe he's going back to the barracks, and he came across a Jew, he could grab that person and say, carry this. And by law, you had to carry his luggage for 1 mile. And Jesus was saying, when that happens, you carry it too, to kind of get their attention. You respond with kindness. Roman soldiers were usually mean. They were usually violent. So this Roman soldier was different. He treated the Jews well. He had compassion for his servant. Maybe this centurion was thinking, boy, after all that we Romans do to these people, I can't just go up to Jesus. If I just go to Jesus, he's not going to help me. I'll send some of my Jewish friends, a delegation. And that's why Matthew 8 describes the centurion approaching Jesus, but in Luke 7 we learned that he approached him through this delegation. The delegation was the way that the centurion came to Jesus. And the plan is, I'll ask him to heal my servant, and then Jesus will just command it. You'll probably notice a little bit later when Jairus asked Jesus to heal his daughter, he asked him to come to the house, assuming that he had to have direct contact with her. Not in this case. This centurion apparently knew Jesus didn't just have medicine, he had access to the power of God. The centurion's Jewish friends went to Jesus and they delivered the message. But apparently either they suggested that Jesus come with them or Jesus just decided to go with them. And Capernaum's a small town, and the centurion probably heard that Jesus was actually coming. So in Luke 7:6, if you remember, it says he sent friends. Remember, first he sent these Jewish elders, and now he's sending some friends of his saying, head him off, cut him off. And he says, no, I didn't say to bring him here. I don't deserve to have him under my roof. I don't deserve to have him as a guest. His Jewish friends were saying that he deserved Jesus' attention, and the centurion was saying he didn't. I don't deserve your attention. His Jewish friends were impressed by his works. Look at all the things that he's done. He built us a synagogue. He's a good guy. He does good things. But that's not what impressed Jesus. He didn't even mention, so good for you, you built a synagogue. He didn't bring that up. Jesus was impressed by his faith. The centurion made an analogy, and this analogy showed he understood the nature of Jesus better than the Jews did. The centurion said, I understand how true authority works. I'm under authority. I have to answer to people. And I have authority. There's people who have to answer to me. There's people above me, people under me. When I say go and come, do this, do that, it gets done. I know you have authority, something way out of my league. Maybe the centurion had heard the Sermon on the Mount, because it says right after the sermon was over in Matthew 8:28, when Jesus had finished these words, the crowds were amazed at his teaching. Remember that? For he was teaching them as one having authority and not as their scribes. But somehow this centurion knew Jesus had authority in a big, big way. Something that was way beyond his own capacity. And so the centurion, her perspective is so simple but powerful, and Christ marveled at his faith. Here was a Gentile Roman who had more faith, or more accurate faith, than the Israelites. And it's worth kind of making the parallel for us. You know, there's a lot of us who have grown up around the church. A lot of times we don't appreciate salvation as much as those who are lost. You know what I mean? We think, well, yeah, I was sort of lost, but I wasn't a bad person. But you begin to realize, no, we were all desperately lost. And so this centurion had a better understanding and appropriate respect for the authority of Jesus. This attitude toward authority was a key component of his true faith, and I think that's something we should take away from this. He says this is how Jesus should be treated, as somebody with authority. What Jesus says goes. When he says stop being sick, you stop being sick. When he says let there be light, when he says Lazarus, come on out, that same authority is in play in the commands that he has given us. We are under the authority of Jesus. I heard a speaker point out an interesting detail about Jesus. For whatever it's worth, counting the 12 apostles and the 70 men that he later sends out, and there were several women that also traveled with him, Jesus may have been in the company of about 100 people. Regardless of the possible significance of that number, Jesus is our centurion. That's one of the things the Roman centurion helps us understand. We are following Jesus. We are under his authority. That's what the centurion got, and that a lot of us don't. Our obedience to him should have the same level of devotion as soldiers following their centurion. When you're on the battlefield, there's no time for a committee. When the centurion makes a command, his soldiers obey. There's no time for discussion. If you disobeyed a direct order, you are in big trouble. And yet today, the authority of Jesus and the authority of the Bible is often treated that way. So, well, I'll get back to you. We'll see if it fits the culture and the time and maybe my own preferences. We should treat God's commands with the same respect as the centurion had toward Jesus. It wasn't just about the ability that Jesus had to command disease to go away. He had all command and all authority. That's true faith. He's our commander. Jesus is our centurion. Hesitating and debating and questioning that is simply trying to dodge his authority. That centurion said to Jesus, "You're in charge. You give the orders." And just like the Jews of that time, we as the people of God need to catch up to that level of faith. There's one more important similarity between Jesus and this centurion. We don't even know his name, but I think he's a good example for us. But there's something else about him that we should admire. And that is a similarity between him and our centurion, Jesus. Our centurion cares deeply for his servants, even more than the Roman centurion did that we're reading about. You are important to him. He cares about your suffering. I wonder about this guy who sent this message to Jesus. He's worried about his servant. He really cares about this guy, and that speaks really well of him. But you are important to Jesus. He cares about what you're going through. If you are suffering, if you're disconnected from God, you need to know baptism puts you under his authority. But it also puts you under his protection. A lot of people kind of flinch and say, no, I want to be free to do what I want to do. Yeah, you're free to descend, to spiral, to disconnect from God. Baptism puts you under Jesus' authority, but it puts you under his protection. And for all of us who've made that decision, it's important to remember he does command us. We are to obey, but he also protects us. We have a centurion who will always come to our rescue. Pray you'll think about this while we stand together and sing.